Evening lights bathed Los Angeles in gold, expensive homes behind tall gates, perfect lawns, a silence so polished it almost leaned. No strangers belonged here, at least. That's what the residents believed. A sleek black Cadillac Escalade drove slowly down the street. Behind the wheel sat a young black woman, dressed in a tracksuit with her hood up and large sunglasses masking her face. She was listening to music, nodding gently to the rhythm. It was Rihanna. No security, no entourage, just a human being, tired of fame's noise. She had spent the day in closed-door business meetings about her new fashion line and now simply wanted to get to her friend's house, quiet, unseen. She didn't know someone was already watching. A police cruiser pulled up beside her at an intersection. Inside, a white officer leaned forward, eyes narrowing at her silhouette. "Something wrong, Joe?" asked his partner. "She doesn't belong here," Joe muttered. "People like her don't drive through this neighborhood. Maybe a tourist? Or a dealer. I'll check it out." Lights flashed. Sirens chirped. Rihanna calmly pulled over. She cracked the window slightly and turned her head, waiting for an explanation. Officer Joe approached with tension already in his walk. He didn't try to be polite. "License and registration," he barked. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" she asked, removing her sunglasses. His expression darkened. "You look too comfortable for this street. People don't ride alone out here, especially not like you." "Like me?" she repeated, stunned. "You heard me. That's racist. That's awareness. Sweetheart, step out of the vehicle. I haven't broken any law. I said out." He grabbed her wrist, dragged her out, slammed her onto the hood, and began searching her roughly. His fingers dug into her skin. "Do you even know who I am?" she muttered through clenched teeth. "Some TikTok rapper?" "I'm Rihanna." He laughed in her face. "Sure, and I'm Obama." But just then, a white woman walking her dog nearby stopped dead in her tracks. "Oh my God. That's Rihanna." "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" "That's Rihanna." Phones appeared. Live streams began. Someone was already calling the news. Officer Joe recoiled, panic setting in. I didn't know." "You didn't identify yourself." "I don't have to. That's the point. You didn't see a person. You saw a color." Silence. Only rain and camera shutters. Rihanna stood tall, calm, humiliated, but unbroken. And at that moment, Joe knew his career was over. The video went viral in hours. That exact moment when Officer Joe dragged Rihanna out of her car, slammed her onto the hood, and searched her aggressively, bruising her wrists. The moment she looked up and calmly said, "I'm Rihanna." The moment he laughed in her face, and in the face of millions watching. Millions of black women who've heard that same dismissive tone their whole lives. "Sure, and I'm Obama." Within 2 hours, it was trending worldwide. By the 4th hour, protesters gathered outside the station. By the 6th, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and Telemundo rolled up their cameras. Rihanna said nothing. No interviews, no stories, no live streams. But her silence spoke volumes. Black Lives Matter launched a march at sunrise. Thousands poured into the streets, fans, activists, mothers whose sons were searched just like Rihanna was. If Rihanna isn't safe, none of us are safe. If they don't recognize Rihanna, they don't recognize us. Inside the department, panic set in. He didn't know who she was. The captain shouted, "Nobody cares." He dragged a black woman out without reason, and now the world saw it. Joe sat alone in an interrogation room, his badge gone, his weapon gone. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst was how his colleagues no longer looked him in the eye. Even the ones who used to laugh with him. Even the ones who did the same things. "You blew it. Now they're coming for all of us." That night, without warning, a post appeared. Black background, white letters. "Now do you see? R." Let's take a short pause. Tell us in the comments where you're from. Have you ever experienced something similar? Faced injustice or prejudice? We want to hear your stories. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. We continue. The morning headlines screamed across every screen. Racism live, police versus Rihanna, LA. Scandal, who is Officer Joe, and why does everyone hate him? He didn't recognize Rihanna. Now the world knows him. TV exploded with debates. Experts, lawyers, psychologists, activists. If she were white, he wouldn't have even approached. This wasn't a mistake. It's a pattern. Protests erupted across the U.S. In New York, the Brooklyn Bridge shut down. In Atlanta, the main square flooded with people. In Oakland, total silence. Thousands stood with hands on their heads, just like she had. Meanwhile, Joe was placed under internal investigation. His home was guarded. He hadn't stepped outside. The department's reputation shattered. And soon, the digging began. This wasn't his first time. 3 years ago, he detained a pregnant black woman. He lost that lawsuit. Over 20 complaints filed, all dismissed. The mayor demanded suspension. The DA called for charges. But everyone waited for one thing. What would she say? 3 days later, just as the White House released a statement, she posted a video, a simple room, no makeup, her voice calm, steady, deep. My name is Rihanna. I'm not just a singer. I'm a woman. I'm a black woman. I wasn't stopped for breaking the law. I was stopped because someone decided I was a threat. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. A pause. Silence. Enough. Now it's our turn to speak. After her video, the world held its breath, but not the police. Inside the LAPD, panic. Some officers deleted social media. Others called lawyers. Most stayed silent. But for the first time in years, some began to speak. Officer Linda, 17 years on the force, submitted her resignation and faced the press. I'm done being silent. We all saw how Joe treated black people, and he was always protected. I once filed a report. They shredded it. Now I'm free, and I'll speak the truth. Her words spread like fire. Meanwhile, Rihanna received threats. Anonymous letters, a scorched envelope, a text, shut up while you still can. Her house, under constant surveillance. Her team, shaken. They're scared, she said. That means we're doing something right. Thousands of people flooded the DA's office, demanding charges. But the courts hesitated. The police union pushed back. He followed protocol. Unknown subject, suspicious, possibly armed. Then, one young prosecutor with black roots went public. My name is Daryl King. I was born in this city, and I know what it's like to be stopped just because of who you are. I promise, this case will be investigated, fairly, and independently. It wasn't just a statement, it was a crack in the system's armor. While one side built shields, the other began breaking walls. And Rihanna was no longer alone. 6 days had passed since the arrest. The city burned with outrage. Media kept the pressure on. But behind closed doors, another game played. Lawyers, police officials, and higher-ups met in secret. This must never reach trial. Shut her down, whatever it takes. The next day, old photos of Rihanna surfaced. Parties, drinks, random people, captions meant to provoke. Is this your victim? Rihanna or risk? TV experts began shifting tone. Yes, Joe went too far, but she's not innocent. Provocative behavior. There are two sides. Rihanna's legal team called it what it was, a smear campaign. But worse came off camera. In the studio parking lot, her bodyguard found something under her car. An explosive device. Live. Military grade. The FBI launched a full investigation. The stakes had escalated. In a private meeting with her attorneys, Rihanna whispered, "They're scared of the truth, so I'll speak louder." That night, an anonymous source leaked something. Footage from Officer Joe's body cam. Unedited. With audio. Insults. Mockery. Threats. And Rihanna's scream at the end. I'm a human being. I'm not a crime. The video went viral in hours. The attempt to silence her backfired spectacularly. After the body cam footage of Joe went viral, the pressure on the police department skyrocketed. But that was just the beginning. Rihanna knew she had now become the target of people far more powerful than the racist cop. Every step she took, every word she spoke, was being watched. First came more threats, not just anonymous letters and phone calls. Now, the warnings were more personal, mentioning her family, her past. They knew all her vulnerabilities. One of these gifts was found on her kitchen counter, a photo of her mother as a child. With the note, "We know where she is." A suspicious car was spotted under her building again. Then another followed. But Rihanna refused to back down. She wasn't going to retreat. And now, with the entire country watching her, she made a decision to reveal the full truth. She planned to give an interview where she would answer every question, leaving no part of her life hidden. On the same day, the police department received a call, anonymously. "If you don't want bigger problems, you will silence her." There was no response, but everyone knew these weren't just threats. Soon, a leak emerged that shocked the city. Documents, confidential reports. They revealed that Joe wasn't the first to overstep his bounds. But it wasn't just him. Several officers, who had been untouchable in the public's eyes, were also involved in shady dealings, and these documents fell into the hands of the press. Court cases began to take on an increasingly loud and threatening tone. But for Rihanna, this wasn't just a victory, it was the beginning of a fight that would likely turn into something far bigger. Then, something unexpected happened. A video, taken during her arrest, surfaced in another investigation. This was more than just compromising footage. Not only Joe was caught, but other officers were also seen making racist remarks about detainees. These words were recorded while Joe and his colleagues laughed at the situation, belittling her, her status, and mocking her both as a woman and as a black woman. Rihanna, realizing this was about to become much bigger than just a legal case, prepared for the decisive step. She called the press for a statement. "I will not stop until justice is served," she said, fighting back tears. "I will do everything in my power to make sure nothing like this ever happens again in this country." The next day, during rush hour, she appeared on the TV screen, not hiding her emotions, not holding back the truth. In her eyes was more determination than ever before. A few days after her press statement, Rihanna felt everything around her beginning to tighten. The world was not just against her, it was now actively working against her. Every step she took, every word she spoke, now under a microscope. Outside her home, strange figures appeared, mysterious, unfamiliar. In the evening, dark cars would circle, their faces obscured. Surveillance was becoming almost constant. That evening, as her attorneys gathered for another meeting, one of them, Thomas, noticed someone watching them. He knew what that meant. He immediately understood they might be in grave danger. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "These people are not just observing. This is a serious threat." No matter how hard she resisted, Rihanna realized this fight wasn't just against the system, but against those who were willing to do anything to protect their interests. The police department was preparing countermeasures. A special press conference, orchestrated by the department's leadership, was scheduled for the following morning. Separate stage, separate questions. The strategy was simple: frame her as a victim, but in a negative light, claim she was using the public's attention for personal gain. "We will continue to fight for the truth," the department's press secretary stated. Rihanna looked at it with disbelief and anger. She knew now that not only was society's gaze on her, but so were the armed hands of those who, as she now realized, had never intended to support her. Her attorneys, seeing the mounting pressure, suggested bringing in witnesses who could prove Joe had been the cause of many similar incidents in the past, but they too began to receive threats, constant anonymous messages, strange phone calls. And then, a twist. A major news story revealed that Joe had found support among the powerful. A person, with connections in the highest circles, declared that Joe was an active agent working for significant interests, defending order, and these people had taken it upon themselves to help manage the investigation from behind the scenes. But with each passing day, Rihanna realized her personal battle had only just begun. With each passing day, the tension mounted, an ever-present sense of danger hung in the air, growing more tangible. Rihanna had no peace. Day or night, every move she made was monitored, every word twisted to discredit her. She was no longer just a woman caught in a scandal. Her life had become a battleground for her reputation, her freedom, and her very soul. The next morning, as she woke up and walked to the window, she saw several police cars passing by down the street. It was a common sight, but today it felt different. Just days before, she had received an anonymous message warning her that she was being targeted, not only for her past, but because her actions had become a threat to the system. Her exposure had triggered a new game, and now her role was not only to be a victim but a target that would not be allowed to survive. When Rihanna met with her attorneys, her face showed not only anxiety but also determination. "The situation is worse than I thought. Joe and his friends, they're not just regular cops. They're the real guardians of the system," she said. Thomas, one of her attorneys, understood that they were facing forces far more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered. The police connections went much deeper than just the local department. This was part of something much bigger. "If they want to destroy us, we'll fight to the end," he responded firmly. Rihanna knew that unless they found support from influential people, her future would be uncertain, but her resolve, despite the threats and pressure, only grew stronger. Meanwhile, the external situation was escalating. The police had launched a campaign to discredit her image, claiming her protests were acts of revenge for unsuccessful investigations. It was a well-thought-out move, involving controlled media and threatening statements. But when Rihanna learned that more powerful forces were behind her persecution than she had ever imagined, it gave her a deeper understanding that her life was now part of something enormous, something unstoppable. However, the more she understood, the more determined she became. She was ready to fight, no matter what. With each passing day, Rihanna felt the danger around her growing. The silence of her opponents had become more menacing than any shout. Even though she had taken every precaution, there was an invisible shadow following her every movement. Fear had become her constant companion. She often noticed strange cars parked near her house, sometimes just down the street, but she refused to let herself panic. Do you know what it means to be under the gun? It's not just a physical feeling. It's psychosis. Every glance, every moment you step outside, everything becomes tied to paranoia. Are you sure this is safe? One of her attorneys asked. We can't give up. We're fighting not only for me but for the thousands of other people who have already become victims of this system, she replied firmly. But despite her words, the pressure was mounting. Even in court, her attorneys felt how difficult it was to fight a system that had been stacked against her from the start. And then came a new twist. Rihanna learned that Joe had already built ties with political forces, and their support was beginning to pose a serious threat to her future. These people held not just power but the resources to crush her. But when her own attorney, Thomas, informed her that they were facing threats from unknown parties, Rihanna understood. Now her life was the price for something bigger than just the truth. We need to act faster, he said, grasping the seriousness of the threat. Rihanna felt her heart freeze. She was ready to go all the way, but were her attorneys ready? Were those who were helping her prepared for this massive risk? And then, just as she thought her reputation and freedom were in the hands of those truly fighting for justice, something incredible happened. During one of the interrogations, when she sat in the room, her heart stopped. There stood the last person she expected to see. It was Joe. His eyes showed no remorse. He looked at her like an object to be manipulated. You're not getting out of this, Rihanna. You'll never leave this alive, he said, emphasizing each word to make it as terrifying as possible. But in that moment, something shifted within her. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when she knew the people behind her problems couldn't defeat her spirit. You're all wrong, Joe. I'll show you what real strength looks like, she whispered, and her eyes turned cold as steel. It was the moment when the world she knew shattered. Now, she was ready to fight not only for herself but for everyone who had suffered from injustice. Rihanna was on the verge of breaking down. The storm around her raged on, but she stood still in the eye of the chaos. Gritting her teeth, she could feel the cold sweat dripping down her back, while inside her, a hurricane was swirling. She still couldn't believe what she had just heard. Thomas, her lawyer, was staring at her, his face neutral, but his voice trembling with concern. Do you understand that Joe is not just one of your enemies? He said, tilting his head as though he was calculating her reaction. He's played us all. Rihanna, he used you. He used your trust. Rihanna could barely breathe. How could she have been so wrong? How had she not seen this sooner? The words echoed in her head, refusing to leave. You said it was all from the start, but I trusted you. Her voice cracked, filled with anger and the sting of betrayal. Thomas remained silent. He knew at this point he couldn't comfort her, but he also knew that everything was set in motion now. All those months, they'd been playing someone else's game. You didn't make a mistake, Rihanna. You just couldn't see the bigger picture. We've all been part of his plan. It hit her like a wrecking ball. Every word she had just heard shattered her into pieces. She thought she had people behind her, people who would protect her, but instead, they had been playing her like a pawn. But suddenly, as if a bolt from the blue, Rihanna's phone rang. She picked it up, not even realizing who could be on the other end. The screen lit up with the number she knew too well. It was James. That person, once her protector, was now calling her. Rihanna, you're in danger. Joe knows your weakness. He's ready for his next move, and you won't be able to stop him. James' voice was cold, even desperate. I know where he'll be. Rihanna, you need to meet with me. Rihanna's heart skipped a beat. This was her chance. But what does he know? She whispered. He's already played his card. Now his next move is you. I'm sending you the coordinates, urgently. And then the call cut off. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. All this time she thought she knew what was coming. But now her entire life hung by a thread. She couldn't trust even those she had confided in. And then, when she looked back at Thomas one last time, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart stop. It wasn't regret. It was fear. He was scared for her, but he was scared for himself too. You don't trust me? Thomas asked, his voice shaking. I don't know who's the enemy and who's the friend anymore, Rihanna replied, her voice filled with pain. She stood there, ready to leave, and suddenly her gaze fell on the door. At that moment, she realized it was her last chance. She had to meet with James, even if it meant being betrayed by one of the last people she thought she could trust. Grabbing her bag, she headed for the door, but before leaving, she turned and looked at Thomas, his gaze filled with questions and fear. You don't know who we are now, Thomas. I don't know who we are now, she whispered, and she walked out. Rihanna stood before the mirror, barely recognizing herself. She had never imagined she would end up here, in this place, surrounded by lies and betrayal. The words James had spoken to her earlier echoed in her mind, his last warnings and promises. He said he would be there, but now she felt more alone than ever. It seemed like Joe controlled the entire world, and now that he sensed she had no way out, he was moving to strike. The enemy was closer than she could have ever imagined. Every step she took now seemed deadly. The call from James haunted her. He wanted to meet again, but Rihanna wasn't sure. He said there was something more she didn't know, but could she really trust him? Her phone buzzed again, and James' number flashed on the screen. Rihanna's heart almost leapt out of her chest, but now, she was ready. She couldn't just sit back anymore. If she allowed this to continue, her life would turn into a game played by someone else's rules. All this time, she had been a pawn, and now it was time to make the decisions herself. Yes, James, her voice was steady, despite the storm inside. You need to be ready for the fact that we'll be facing Joe directly soon. I'll find out everything I can, but you need to be careful. His networks stretch across the city. He controls not just people, but information. His voice was more strained than she had ever heard. Rihanna nodded. Even though James couldn't see her, he was right. Joe was powerful, and if he wanted, he could erase her without a trace. With each passing day, his influence only grew. But now, Rihanna knew one thing: she wasn't ready to surrender. Rihanna sighed and glanced out the window. The evening light fell over the city, hiding the shadows, but the darkness in her heart remained. She had only a few days left to fix everything. Suddenly, her phone rang again. It was an unknown number, and at that moment, Rihanna's heart skipped a beat. Someone in this city knew more about her than she realized. Her instincts kicked in instantly. Hello, Rihanna. It's me, Thomas. I know who's behind Joe. You won't believe it, but it's someone from your past. She froze. Her world began to collapse like sand through an hourglass. Who could she still suspect? Thomas, what do you mean? Her voice was tight, but an unknown threat began to pull her deeper. It was you, Rihanna. You've been part of his plan all along. Rihanna felt the ground slip from under her feet. This was what she had feared. She couldn't believe those words, but the meaning was undeniable. She silently hung up the phone and walked across the room. All this time, the hidden danger hadn't been from the outside world. It had been here, among her own. Now, Rihanna stood on the edge. She had trapped herself in a web she couldn't escape from, and the worst part was, now she couldn't trust anyone. Time was running out. Rihanna knew that her life hinged on how she played this final act. The people around her, her allies, everyone had taken on the unequal battle against Joe and his system. Now, it all came down to one final step. The city that had once been her home had become a place where every corner held a threat. She had taken the risk to find Joe, to defeat him once and for all. But there was one thing she hadn't predicted: Thomas. Her old acquaintance, the one she thought was her friend, turned out to be at the very heart of it all. He was the one behind Joe, the one whose plan had brought her to this point. Every hope she had for salvation had been false. She had been dragged into their game from the very beginning, and her trust had been a fatal mistake. You didn't think I'd let you go, did you? Thomas stood before her, his face twisted in mockery, but there was a dark resolve in his eyes. You were part of this plan, Rihanna. You thought you were in control, but all this time, you were just a pawn. Rihanna couldn't believe it. She, the real star, the Hollywood actress, had been part of something much darker and more terrifying than she could ever have imagined. All this time, she had been playing on the side of her enemies. Her mind raced to find a way out, but every move she made now was calculated, and even the one chance for salvation was in jeopardy. She didn't know who she could trust. Much of what had seemed true turned out to be lies. But now, she had only one option left: to act. She looked at Thomas, feeling her heart race with both fear and rage. He was the one who knew her weaknesses, but now his words lost all power. He thought she was broken, but that was his last misjudgment. You're wrong, Thomas. I'm not a pawn. I'm the player, and if you think I'm going to let you win, you don't know me at all. Her voice was full of strength, despite the terror swirling inside her. Thomas smirked and stepped forward, but Rihanna quickly grabbed an object within arm's reach, ready to use it. The fight was inevitable. She knew her life could end in this room, but that couldn't stop her. The battle had begun. Several months passed. Joe was no longer the confident cop he once was, the man who had held power and control in his hands. His face no longer held the pride and determination it once did. Now, in his eyes, all that could be seen was fear and paranoia. He hadn't slept in nights. His body was drenched in sweat, and his mind was slowly crumbling. Every day was filled with the tormenting realization of how he had brought everything to this point. He no longer felt like a man. He had become nothing more than a shadow, running from his own fears. He feared that Rihanna would come for him, to exact her revenge. He feared that she wouldn't just take revenge, she would shatter his world. Her words echoed in his head. "You thought you'd win? You were wrong." Joe tried to escape this nightmare. He changed addresses, phone numbers, but no matter where he went, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was near, watching him. His hands trembled when he tried to perform simple tasks, opening doors, pouring a glass of water. Every glance, every step felt like a threat. He heard footsteps in the night, even if no one was there. He constantly turned around, as if expecting to see her in any mirror or shadow lurking in the corners of his room. Joe had lost his calm. His world was falling apart, and he didn't know how to stop it. Sometimes, it felt as though he had lost his very soul. He had forgotten what it meant to feel joy or confidence. He had become dependent on alcohol and pills, just to numb himself for a moment from the reality. His life no longer made sense, and he knew that all of this was punishment for the terrible things he had done. He understood that no one can escape the consequences of their sins. But even in this despair, one question haunted him: if Rihanna ever came for him, how could he survive it? How could he live knowing his destruction awaited? He sat in a dark room, completely alone, when suddenly he heard footsteps. He turned and saw the door slightly ajar. Panic immediately ignited in his soul. "Rihanna." He whispered her name in the dark, like a spell. But the door was empty. He was alone again, but his fear didn't vanish. He couldn't escape his own fate. With each passing day, his world crumbled, and he understood that he would never be able to hide from what he had done. Rihanna never showed up, but Joe knew she would always be there for him. There would be no more peace in his life. Fate, like his own sins, would not let him forget.